Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going all the way to the Middle East.
Always an interesting place to be looking at.
It really is, especially right now. We're going to be looking at the potential impact of the newly elected U.S. president's foreign policy team and what they might mean for the region.
Big changes coming.
Well, that's what we're here to find out. We've got an article and a video from Al-Jazeera published right as this new team was being announced.
Oh, hot off the presses. So November 15th, 2024, right?
That's right. And one thing that really stuck out to me was how Al Jazeera kept describing this team as like taking shape.
Taking shape.
Yeah. What do you think they're molding over there?
That's a great question. I mean, it definitely makes you wonder what direction things are going to go in, especially for the Middle East. You know, even subtle shifts in U.S. policy, it can have some pretty big ripple effects.
Oh, absolutely. So it's like everyone's kind of watching and waiting, holding their breath to see which way this new shape is going to lean.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we're all about reading those tea leaves. One thing I'm really curious about, the article doesn't really name names, but it talks about the overall message these appointments send.
Oh, yeah. That's interesting.
What kind of message do you think is being telegraphed just by the types of people being brought in?
It's interesting that Al Jazeera, they highlight a potential shift in approach toward the Israel-Palestine conflict. They even mention it, like right in the title. And that conflict is often seen as a barometer of U.S. policy in the whole region, don't you think?
Absolutely. It feels like how the U.S. handles that situation kind of sets the tone for, like, everything else.
Yeah.
So what's the article actually saying about those potential policy changes and how they might actually play out?
Well, one specific point they raise is concern over a potential softening of the U.S. stance on Israeli settlements.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And the article, it quotes a source as saying, and I'm paraphrasing here, but basically that this new administration might not be as vocal in its criticism of that settlement expansion in the West Bank.
Now, that's a big deal, right? I mean, because that's been like a major sticking point in peace negotiations for years and years.
Yeah, for a very long time.
If the U.S. just like takes a step back, wouldn't that kind of throw like more fuel on the fire?
The article definitely suggests that possibility. They argue that this type of move could embolden, well, the more hardline elements on both sides, and that would just make a peaceful resolution even more elusive.
Right.
But on the other hand, you know, they also acknowledge that some experts, they believe that a fresh perspective could be a good thing.
Okay, yeah.
It could lead to like new approaches that might actually break the deadlock.
So it's like high stakes gamble.
It is.
No one knows for sure if this new approach will, you know, make things better or make things worse.
Exactly. And that's what makes this so fascinating to analyze. We're essentially watching a real-time experiment in international relations unfold with no guarantee of the outcome.
Definitely a nail biter. And it makes me wonder, what are some other specific concerns or hopes that the article highlights regarding this new team's potential impact on the region? I mean, beyond just this whole Israel-Palestine issue.
Well, yeah. Well, the article also touches upon the potential impact on U.S.-Iran relations.
Oh, right.
You know, the previous administration took a very hardline stance with Iran.
Yeah.
You know, withdrawing from that nuclear deal and imposing those sanctions.
Yeah, that caused a lot of tension in the region.
It did.
So what's the thinking on how this new team might actually handle Iran?
Well, Al Jazeera suggests that there is a possibility for a more diplomatic approach.
Okay.
Even maybe a return to some form of like a negotiated agreement. And they point out that some of these individuals that are being considered for key positions have a history of advocating for engagement.
Okay.
Rather than that confrontation with Iran.
So maybe a less fiery, more talk it out kind of approach.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. But the article does caution that there are powerful voices within the U.S. government and in the region who strongly oppose any concessions to Iran.
Right.
So even if this new team wants to pursue diplomacy, they're going to face a lot of pushback.
It's like they're walking a tightrope, trying to balance all these like competing interests and pressures.
It is.
Makes you wonder, what would be the smartest move for them to make? You know, considering all these complexities we've been talking about.
Well, the article doesn't offer any easy answers, but it does highlight a few potential scenarios.
Okay.
One possibility is that the new team tries to find some common ground with Iran on issues like Yemen, you know, where both countries have an interest in ending the conflict.
So maybe a kind of like enemy of my enemy is my friend situation, using those shared goals to kind of build a bridge.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's not about becoming best buddies, but finding those areas of like pragmatic cooperation that could benefit both sides.
Right.
The article also mentions the possibility of confidence-building measures, like prisoner exchanges, or maybe a limited sanctions relief, as ways to create a more positive atmosphere for negotiations.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Small steps to build that trust before tackling the really big issues.
Right, and then there's the question of how all of this will play out on the ground in places like Syria and Iraq.
Right.
Where Iran has a significant presence.
Yeah.
The article suggests that any shift in U.S. policy toward Iran could have ripple effects in those countries as well.
Okay.
Potentially altering that balance of power and influencing the course of those ongoing conflicts.
So this isn't just about two countries talking to each other. It's about a whole web of relationships and power dynamics shifting across the entire region.
Precisely. And that's what makes this so fascinating, but also so challenging to predict.
Yeah.
Even the smallest move by the U.S. can trigger a chain reaction with unforeseen consequences.
It's like a giant game of chess where every piece is connected and every move matters.
A very high-stakes game with no clear winners or losers, just a constant struggle for influence and advantage. And the players are always changing, with new actors, like Russia and China, becoming more assertive in the region.
Speaking of new players, the article does mention how both Russia and China are watching these developments very closely.
Yeah.
What's their angle here? Are they just spectators, or are they trying to, influence things behind the scenes?
Well, Al-Jazeera suggests that both countries see an opportunity to expand their own influence in the Middle East, often at the expense of the U.S.
No.
They argue that Russia, in particular, has been very effective at capitalizing on U.S. missteps and building relationships with key players in the region, including Iran.
So it's like they're waiting in the wings, ready to pounce if the U.S. stumbles.
That's one way to look at it.
Okay.
They're certainly not passive observers. They have their own interests and agendas, and they're willing to use both diplomacy and hard power to advance them.
Okay, so we've got this, incredibly complex situation with multiple players vying for power,
We do.
conflicting interests, and a whole lot of uncertainty. Given all of that, what's your take on the biggest challenges facing this new U.S. foreign policy team as they try to navigate the Middle East? What are the potential pitfalls they need to be most wary of?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is avoiding the trap of oversimplifying the situation.
Okay.
The Middle East isn't a monolithic entity.
Right.
It's a region with a rich tapestry of cultures, histories, and political systems.
Right. It's not just one big problem to be solved. It's a whole bunch of interconnected issues and perspectives.
Exactly. And that's why I think it's crucial for this new team to engage with the region on its own terms. To listen to the voices of the people who live there and to develop policies that are nuanced and tailored to the specific circumstances of each country.
So less of a one-size-fits-all approach, more of a focus on building those relationships and understanding that local context.
Precisely. They also need to be mindful of the unintended consequences of their actions. The Middle East is a region where even seemingly small decisions can have huge ripple effects.
Yeah.
It's essential to think several steps ahead and to anticipate how different actors might react to U.S. policies.
I'm hearing a lot of proceed with caution in your voice. It sounds like you're saying this new team needs to be both strategic and sensitive in their approach.
Absolutely. They need to be tough when necessary, but also willing to compromise and build bridges.
Right.
They need to be clear about their goals, but also flexible in their methods.
Okay.
It's a delicate balancing act, but one that's essential for success in the Middle East.
It's definitely a high-wire act, and all eyes are on them.
They are.
So as we're kind of wrapping up this part of our deep dive, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the Al Jazeera article itself.
Okay.
What stood out to you the most? What kind of impression did it leave you with?
Well, I think the article does a good job of highlighting the potential risks and opportunities facing the new U.S. administration in the Middle East. It's clear that they're approaching this with a cautious optimism, acknowledging both the challenges and the possibilities.
It's definitely not a black and white picture they're painting.
Right.
It's more like shades of gray with a lot of uncertainty about how things will ultimately play out.
And that's what makes it so compelling.
Yeah.
We're essentially watching a drama unfold in real time with no script and no guarantees.
And it's a drama that has the potential to impact millions of lives. For better or for worse.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to stay informed, to engage in critical thinking, and to demand that our leaders make wise and just decisions.
Okay, so we've really dug deep into the potential shifts in U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East.
We have.
But now in this final part, I want to shift gears a bit and talk about what all of this means for us for everyday people.
Okay.
Trying to make sense of a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable.
That's a great point. It's easy to get lost in the weeds of policy debates and geopolitical maneuvering, but ultimately what matters is how these decisions impact people's lives.
Exactly. So let's zoom out a bit and think about, the human side of things. What are some of the key concerns or hopes that people in the Middle East, might have about this new U.S. administration?
Well, I think one of the biggest concerns is that, this new approach, while it might offer some opportunities, could also lead to greater instability and conflict in the short term. Remember, anytime you have a shift in those power dynamics, there's always that risk of things getting a little messy.
Yeah.
As different groups kind of try to adjust and assert themselves.
Right. It's like shaking up a snow globe. It might look pretty at first, but it takes a while for everything to settle back down.
Exactly. And in the Middle East, that settling down process can be, quite turbulent.
Yeah.
The Al-Jazeera article touches on this. They point out that some experts worry that a less confrontational approach to Iran, it could actually embolden certain groups.
Okay.
Potentially leading to proxy conflicts or even direct military clashes.
To a more peaceful approach in theory,
Yeah.
but a risk of more violence in practice. Yeah.
That seems like a tough paradox to navigate.
It is. It highlights the need for really clear communication and strategic thinking on the part of the U.S.
Right.
It's not enough to simply change tactics.
Yeah.
You also need to have a well-defined strategy for managing that potential fallout.
Okay, so let's say they do manage to avoid those pitfalls. What about the flip side? What are some of the potential positive outcomes that people in the region might be hoping for?
Well, I think the biggest hope is for greater stability and security.
Yeah.
For a lot of people in the Middle East, daily life is a struggle for survival.
Right.
And it's made even more difficult by these ongoing conflicts and all this political turmoil.
Yeah.
A new U.S. approach, if it's successful, could help to create a more peaceful environment. Allowing people to rebuild their lives and focus on things like education, healthcare, and economic opportunity.
So a chance to finally breathe a sigh of relief and start looking toward the future with some sense of optimism.
Yeah, exactly. The Al-Jazeera article also mentions the potential for increased cooperation on issues like climate change.
Right.
And water scarcity, challenges that transcend political boundaries, and they really require these regional solutions.
That's a great point. These are issues that impact everyone, regardless of their nationality or political belief.
Exactly. And addressing them effectively requires that spirit of collaboration and shared responsibility.
Yeah.
Something that's been sorely lacking in the Middle East for, far too long.
It sounds like what we're really talking about is a fundamental shift in the way that the U.S. actually engages with the region.
It is.
Moving away from a transactional, security-focused approach towards something more holistic and sustainable.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's about recognizing that true security comes not just from military strength,
Right.
but also from economic prosperity and social justice and environmental sustainability.
And that requires a long-term vision, a willingness to invest in, diplomacy and development.
Yeah, it does. And a commitment to, working with those local partners to really address the root causes of all that conflict and instability.
Absolutely. It's not a quick fix.
Yeah.
It's a long and complex process.
Right.
But the potential rewards, they're enormous.
Right.
Both for the people of the Middle East and for the U.S.
Well said. So as we wrap up our deep dive into this Al Jazeera piece, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. We've talked a lot about, what the U.S. government can and should do.
Yes.
But what about us as individuals?
Yeah.
What role can we play in shaping a more peaceful and just world, particularly in the Middle East?
That's a crucial question. And I think the most important thing we can do is to stay informed.
Okay.
And stay engaged, read widely, challenge your own assumptions, and seek out, diverse perspectives. Don't be afraid to ask those difficult questions and hold your leaders accountable.
And don't underestimate the power of empathy and understanding. The Middle East is often portrayed in a very simplistic and often negative light in the media.
It is.
Take the time to really learn about those rich cultures and histories of the region and to connect with people on a human level.
Exactly. Remember, we're all connected in this world.
Yeah.
And our actions, no matter how small they may seem, can have a ripple effect.
So let's choose to make those ripples positive ones. Let's be, forces for peace, understanding, and justice, not just in the Middle East, but everywhere.
Well said. It's a journey we must all take together.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and keep exploring.